Shutter speed is really simple. It is the speed of your shutter. It's how long your shutter is open, letting light into your camera. You can control two really important things with your shutter speed. One is how much light you let in, and two is how you freeze action. Take a look at this picture of this dog, for example. This was probably taken with a really fast shutter speed, and we can tell because all the water droplets around the dog's face are frozen in the air, and the dog's face itself is also frozen in that shaking expression. His lips sort of flying up in the air. Everything is frozen right in place, even though we know that the dog is moving really quickly. So when you have really fast action, like a shaking dog or a running or jumping person, if you use a really fast shutter speed too, you'll be able to freeze that action. Here's another case, a man water skiing. He's frozen, and so is this wave up behind him. All the little parts of the wave are frozen in the air. This was another really fast shutter speed. In another example with water, you see all the droplets are frozen right in the air. If we were looking at this with the naked eye, we would just see streams of water coming out. But here we get to capture the action with a super fast shutter speed. In this case, the photographer used a slower shutter speed, which means that the shutter was open long enough to have this woman walk by with this hospital bed, and she's a blur. Here's another case where a slower shutter speed shows that the water is flowing. If this were a fast shutter speed like the first few photos we looked at, all the water would be frozen in the air. With a slowed down shutter speed, in this case we get sort of a lacy effect with the water. And here's another case of a really long shutter speed. Imagine if this had been taken really quickly. All we would see is a bunch of dots from the headlights and taillights of these cars, because they would be frozen in place. But with a really long shutter speed, the cars have been allowed to go by while the shutter was open, so we get these streaking headlights and taillights. Okay, so shutter speed. Let's review. A really fast shutter speed lets in less light and freezes the action. And a really slow shutter speed lets in a lot more light and lets the action show up on the photo in a blur. But sometimes all you want is a really nice crisp photo of a person or a plant or whatever it is in front of you. And sometimes that photo turns out blurry and you're not sure why. Well, one reason could be because your shutter speed is too slow. Here's a good example. You can see that this doll is not in focus. Well, actually my lens was perfectly focused on the doll, but my hand was moving as I pressed the shutter, and I was using a shutter speed that was too slow. So a slow shutter speed is going to record the motion of my hands as I press the shutter, and as you see, turn out sort of blurry photo. I shot this at 1/30th of a second, and that is too slow for a handheld photo. Now if I'd had a tripod, that'd be another story because my camera wouldn't be moving at all. Now this one I shot at 1/60th of a second. You can see that the doll is much more crisp in this photo, and my hand was probably still moving as much as it was in the first photo, but 1/60th of a second is just fast enough to freeze the photo. So what is fast enough and what is too slow? Generally, 1/60th of a second is as slow as you want to go when you're holding your camera in your hands and you don't have a tripod. Now that changes when you zoom in. If you're zooming in to 90 millimeters, you instead need to go a little bit faster to 1/90th of a second. If you're zooming in to 200 millimeters, you want to try to shoot at 1/200th of a second. These aren't exact numbers, of course, but they are a good rule to follow if you want to make sure that you freeze the action in your photo.